that's the latest development in that field. And Abhay Krishna here has been doing some very intense cleaning, very deep cleaning all week, 6-7 hours a day, 8 hours a day. And he's glowing, he's effulgent as a result of that, as is everything he's been touching. So it's very inspiring. And Brunirani has been doing a lot of editing. I think she's edited 14 chapters of my book now, first edit. And so that's proceeding. We were looking into developing a Hindi publishing division of Darshan Press, translating my books into Hindi and having them published in India. So Chaitanya Priya and Shastravani are the initial members of the tentative early Hindi publishing division. We'll see. As you know, we have books in Polish and Spanish, and I just the other day received copies of the Spanish translations of my friend Shikshastakam and Joy of Self. Very, very nice. And they're being, Padmanabh Maharaj told me that when he went to Colombia recently, he did a seminar there, and I think he distributed 200 books. He could have done 400 if he could have carried them in a suitcase. So seems to be an appetite for them in Latin America. Happy to hear that. Have to get him back down there with another suitcase full of books. So that's good. Weather here is nice. Spring is trying to come. The child of spring is trying to get free from the grips of old man winter here. So they're having their struggle back and forth. It's a beautiful time at Audarya. We have maybe about another month of our commercial dairy. As I said, we're closing the commercial end of the dairy, and we had to give our clients, a couple of months. So we have about 1 month left of that. Once that's closed, and we'll have more time for other projects here. So looking forward to that. That's the news. So what are the questions this morning?
Just to let you know, we have 8 questions so far.
How many?
Pardon?
How many do you have?
8.
8. Okay, 8.
So the first one is from Bhakti Shakti. You need to unmute yourself, and also everybody click on your English and click on mute original audio so that everyone can hear each other.
Pranams Guru Maharaj. Do you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Oh.
Yeah. I can hear you. Maybe you can't.
Thank you. Oh.
Bhakti Shakti, can you hear Guru Maharaj? Can you hear me?
Can't hear you now.
I'll go to the next
I'm sorry, my connection dropped. I can ask it now or
yeah.
Maybe. Okay, thank you. I was listening to, like, in some occasions I have heard sometimes the language Brajbasa from the local Brajbasa, and it's a very beautiful intonation and sound, and it sounds extremely joyful and very amazing. And I was wondering, can you say something about it? And if we have to concentrate on a language to study a little bit more of it, is it Bengali or Sanskrit, which is more important to study more, not to study complete, but maybe to by studying the Shastras to accumulate some words and phrases like that.
Yeah, well, I think that language is obviously a significant aspect of a culture. And the culture of Braj or Nadia, of Chaitanya Bhakti, of Krishna Prem, was obviously originally expressed in Bengali and in Sanskrit. And Brij Bhasa I'm not actually very familiar with. And I don't know how much it's spoken now. It seems like Hindi is pretty prominent in Vrindavan, and then a lot of people speak Bengali there, of course, too. Just to go into Brij Bhas for a second, there are, of course, some earlier works written in Brij Bhas by different saints, poems, poetic works about Krishna, Krishna Lila, and so forth. Some important ones. They're outside of our sampradaya, but they are concerned with more or less the same thing, of course, that we're concerned with, the Braja Lila. But at any rate, yes, as I was saying, language is an important aspect of a culture. So, to enter into that which from the hearts of great devotees is being expressed through the limits of language is difficult in and of itself. What to speak of if the language is not your language? So there's much to be said for learning Bengali or Sanskrit, I would say, more than Brij Bhas, because all the literature is what's all practically available in Bengali. The Goswamis, of course, and that was the beginning language through which Chaitanya Bhakti, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teaching was expressed. By himself, by Nityananda Prabhu, by those who were experiencing the manifestation of Gaur Lila as it happened. Later, the Goswamis wrote about it theologically in Sanskrit, which is more the universal religious language at the time. And so that took a local Bengali notion of divinity and brought it into consideration of the nation, so to speak, or the greater region of Bharat, and within that, among the intellectual and educated sadhus for consideration. So that was a big contribution, obviously, on the part of the Goswamis to write about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Sanskrit. So it's a lot easier to learn Bengali than it is to learn Sanskrit. And so I would recommend that approach to most devotees interested in entering into the language. And there's just so much to learn and feel through the language that's lost, in translation. A lot of the translations today into English of the texts of the Goswamis is very flat. It's very, it doesn't do anything near what it would do to someone who knew the language in terms of bringing out emotion and so forth, with the use of different metaphors and drawing upon the culture of the time to express the ideas and so forth. So that's why if you're going to write, for example, as I do in English, you really want to have a feeling for it and for the teaching, and also have a good command of the language. English language, to try to then do the same thing. I mean, a literal translation is not going to be as useful as a translation that understands the meaning and then puts it in words that will, in for example, in English, that will convey the feeling of it and draw people in the way that when the texts were written in Bengali or Sanskrit by scholars of our Sampradaya in days gone by were doing with the command of the language that they had. I mean, Krishnadas Kaviraj was a scholar. So, I mean, he wrote, a whole of Chaitanya Charitamrita, thousands of verses in poetry, describing accurately depicting the Leela, and then the theology and the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's like an extraordinary literary contribution. The Bhagavad itself is an extraordinary literary contribution in comparison to any other book in its genre, any other Purana. So there's a lot to be said anyway. I don't want to go on about it, but a lot to be said for learning the languages. And I would recommend that someone that had an interest in that would begin to learn Bengali, which is a very, very, very sweet language itself. It was, of course, the native tongue of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. So, that's part of the whole larger discussion of the modern world, cultures outside of India, outside of Bengal, and then in the context of those cultures, understanding and and applying, I should say, the essence of the Chaitanya Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Bengali Vaishnavism. Some people want to strip away all types of Indian features in the name of being spiritually essential, for example, in the United States. And I think that's certainly an extreme that which much will be lost. So to bring some balance is an art, and I think there's a lot to be said in that regard for taking the time to understand the language that the teaching originated in and was originally spoken in, and it's so much about it has been written in. It will do great command of that language to be on the part of anyone would really enhance their capacity to enter into what it was spoken there. And short of that, of course, or better than that, perhaps, is to have someone who's very well situated in understanding that can speak about it in your own language, or a language that you're fluent in, that does what I said earlier, that not just a literal flat kind of a translation, but a whole purport, into the verse, if you will, adapting from those texts and putting it in English words with the same kind of feeling. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Good question.
Aminava Swami.
There's a comment by Sarda. She says, for me, as I'm half Bengali, the Bengali seems more important and feels more sweet and heartfelt, I guess she means, than Sanskrit. However, with others, it might be different. Haribol, Haribol.
Haribol, Haribol.
I certainly agree with you. Therefore, Ami Bongo.
Hare Krishna. Respects.
Yes. Huh. See.
You went silent.
Well, I think that what the question seems to be about, if I understand it, is the idea that the Atma is a witness, and that by its presence and proximity, let's say, to material nature, through the medium of attachment, which an Atma has the capacity to be attached. Matter doesn't have the capacity to be attached, so to speak, to have feeling. So through the power of its inherent capacity to have feelings, to experience feelings, qualitative experience, to have qualitative experiences, I guess you could say, in proximity to matter, matter is activated, and microcosmically, of course, a body is formed. The sense of identity, ahankar, buddhi, discrimination, chitta, desires, thoughts, and so forth. And then the gross body, made up of the senses. There are subtle senses as well. The senses are really thought to be situated in the subtle body, and then they have apertures on the physical body. But all that psychic and physical matter is activated by the witnessing Atma. Now, when we say that the Atma is a witness, we have a different idea about that in Gaudiya Vedanta than, for example, in Patanjali's yoga philosophy. There, the Atma is depicted as such a witness that it has no agency. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't cause anything to happen in relation to material nature. So we don't agree with that perspective. We think that the Atma, yes, it's a witness, but it's also an agent of action. So to put it one way, some things happen only because somebody's looking at them. If somebody wasn't looking, they wouldn't happen. So somehow or other, the Atma is an agent of action and has an influence upon matter. Now, your question is that, well, these senses are acting, and we're witnessing. So that was part of your question. What the actual question is, now I'm kind of forgetting a little bit, but forgive me. But I think that there's a difference between witnessing the function of the senses in terms of their normal activities and participating through the senses in relation to sense objects for the pleasure of Krishna. I wouldn't look at that as just like something I'm witnessing. Whereas in yoga, the normal functions of the senses, their interaction with the sense objects, yes, one's a witness of them. But when it comes to actively engaging the senses in Krishna Bhakti, well, that's much more participatory, I would say, than it is witnessing, and it's a spiritualizing both of the sense objects and the senses themselves. So the sadhaka deha in Gaudiya Vaishnavism takes on a spiritual quality. Prabhupada used to compare the sadhaka deha to a gold-plated box, and the siddha deha, the internal meditative body, to a gold box. So a gold-plated box, for all intents and purposes, looks like a gold box. There are statements in the scripture that go further in terms of spiritualizing, if you will, the senses. So I think there's something to be said in relation to your question that differentiates, as I have, between the witnessing of a yogi, of the functioning of the senses, his breathing, and whatnot, and the way in which a devotee participates sensually in sadhana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti is basically bhakti performed with the senses, even without emotive, an emotive motor, because the bhava has not yet manifest through association, through intellect, one and bhakti samskars, one becomes engaged in bhakti with the senses, hearing and chanting and so forth. So that's very different than the yogi's life, to make the comparison, which the word witness, brings to mind for me. And of course, then as this body is engaged, the body being consisting of senses, gradually then bhava manifests, and then continue to engage with the same senses. And it's the motor behind that, the force that's driving that is the emotional component of bhakti, the bhava, the feeling. And that's a very different kind of life than just looking at the Atma as a witness. That's my thoughts. I don't know if I've answered your question sufficiently, but aside from that, yes, there's some basically something to be said for differentiating. This is gyan, but it's part of bhakti also. Differentiating the body from the self with one's intellect and employing that yogic perspective to some extent. Hope that helps. If there's a further comment or question you'd like to raise in relation to that, feel free to do so.
Yes, Maharaj, thank you very much.
Can you hear me,
A
everyone?
lot of ideas.
Arjun?
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you, but we can't hear. No.
No. ¿Qué piensas? ¿Está bien o necesito
Ok,
más
Swami.
explanación?
Sí, muchas gracias por la respuesta y
Can't hear him.
me ayudó bastante,
No podemos.
con la percepción de la pregunta.
Okay. Gracias.
Devyapati, need to unmute.
Hare Krishna. I'm interested how to understand in the best way the saying and how to apply it, if it is possible. This in the morning that we should beat the mind with 100 times with the shoes, and in the evening 100 times with the broomstick. How to understand it and how to apply it.
Right. These are statements of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And I wouldn't make too much more out of them than the fact that the mind is the seat of desire, and it, as a result, is distracting us from our practice. And many ideas, thoughts are conjured up there as to what might be desirable. But we, as a Sharanagata, as a surrendered soul, will not listen to the mind, but we'll listen to what's favorable for bhakti. That'll be good. What's unfavorable for bhakti, that'll be bad. We make our determination there. Then, as much as we can really do that with earnestness, is as quickly as we will transcend the dualities that are arising through the limited medium of perception in the form of the mind and the senses. So the mind and the senses dictate to us that this is good or this is bad, and we each live in a little world of our own goods and bads, happies and sads, and so forth. But we have another criterion now. If it's good for Krishna, bhakti, then it's good, even if it doesn't feel good. And if it's bad, unfavorable for Krishna bhakti, even if it would be pleasurable to my mind and senses, I reject it. As much as you can do that, which is not easy to do. But it's a relatively easy way to transcend hot, cold, good, bad, happy, and sad, that by contrast, yogis are trying to accomplish by the difficult approach of, for example, submerging themselves in freezing cold water up to the neck in the coldest month of the year, and saying to themselves, cold is only a perception of the mind. Or sitting in the hottest day of the year surrounded by fire and saying heat is only in the mind. That's a little difficult to do compared to the bhakti approach, which isn't easy either, but comparatively it's easy. And so to beat the mind with a shoe, to beat it with a broom, I mean, he's basically telling us that, that there are better persons to listen to than the mind. The mind is like a thief who, after robbing the bank, runs into the public sector and says, thief, thief, someone just robbed the bank. So everyone, which way did he went that way. And so everybody thanks him and runs the opposite way. This is how deceitful, treacherous, if you will, the mind is sometimes depicted to be, and I think accurately so for the yogi. So to control the mind is central to all forms of yoga, and bhakti yoga is not excluded in that regard. We say that bhakti yoga is easier and user-friendly, and it is, but we have to apply ourselves to those practices of bhakti yoga with as much effort as the yogi who submerges himself up to his neck in the cold water and so forth. When we hear about the yoga samadhi, I was speaking with Padmanabh Maharaj about, what was it, prakriti nirvana, another type of nirvana, merging with matter, with the different ingredients of matter, even the pradhan and so forth. And some yogis attain this, and they can be indefinitely suspended there, and it's blissful, and but it's not a liberated position. But the endeavor that they undertake to attain that position would probably scare the tilak off of the head of most devotees. Face of devotees, the effort that they put in to attain that. What we have to understand is that our object of attainment exceeds that a trillion billion fold. Our means to attain it is comparatively easier, but we have to put in that much effort or more, and we should be inspired to put in that much more effort. So when we say it's easy, it's effortless, comparatively, yes. In one sense, as I've often said, our effort is to acquire grace. That's true. But look at the effort, for example, of Mother Yasoda to try to tie up Krishna. She was perspiring and making it. That's kind of sometimes given as an example. So, with regard to controlling the mind, fixing the mind on Krishna. Okay, what is a yogi? What effort a yogi's putting in, and what effort are we putting in every day to fix the mind upon Krishna? So you're not going to get the results just by having this as your religion, and then learning the teaching and then regurgitating it to other people, you have to put it into your serious practice. And manusyanam sahasreshu, you have to live with that. It's not easy, but there's no alternative if you understand it. So I think those statements are just about the fact that one has to be vigilant with regard to observing, to go back to Martin's question earlier, observing the mind and where it's going in the wrong direction and bringing it back and so forth. That's what the Thakur, Saraswati Thakur is speaking about. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki jai.
Jai, thank you very much.
Okay, Eric?
Dandavats and good morning, Maharaj.
Good morning.
So my question is regarding a passage I recently read in the 4th chapter of the 4th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, where Lord Brahma spoke to Lord Shiva after the events of Daksha's sacrificial ceremony and Sati leaving her body. So in verses 42, 43, and 46 of this chapter, Lord Brahma says some things that were kind of confusing to me. He says the following, my dear Lord Shiva, I know that you are the controller of the entire material manifestation, the combination father and mother of the cosmic manifestation and the supreme Brahman beyond the cosmic manifestation as well. You create this cosmic manifestation, maintain it, and annihilate it by expansion of your personality, exactly as a spider creates, maintains, and winds up its web. Devotees who have fully dedicated their lives unto your lotus feet certainly observe your presence as Paramatma in each and every being, and as such they do not differentiate between one living being and another. So I'm a bit confused as to why Lord Brahma says all of this to Lord Shiva, as many of these statements, such as reference to being the supreme Brahman, Paramatma, being the source of creation, sustenance, and destruction, that seems like they would only be applicable to Krishna or personalities within the category of Vishnu Tattva. And from my understanding, Lord Shiva is in a separate, distinct category of Shiva Tattva. So could you please clarify this? Thank you.
Well, Shiva is a complex person, and there are many different manifestations of Shiva, but the kind of the pinnacle of the Shiva Tattva is the Sadashiva, who is thought to be one with Mahavishnu. So he seems to be speaking in the highest sense from a Tattva point of view, and identifying Shiva with Vishnu, distinguishing him from the other gods, the other people of the world, other types of entities, and so on and so forth. We discussed this the other day on Advaita Saptami, the appearance of Advaita Acharya, who's thought to be the Shiva of along with Haridas, Brahma and Shiva of Krishna Lila. At the same time, Advaita Acharya is readily identified with Mahavishnu. So the Shiva is kind of let's take the glance of Shiva, for example, is an aspect of Mahavishnu. So I think he's speaking along those lines, along those terms, with regard to Shiva Tattva. From a Tattva point of view, again, I think we give him a high position as what is his name? Sadashiva. When we say Sadashiva, we mean about not any partial manifestation of Shiva in the world, but eternal, who lives in the Paravyam also. So, and he has two sides: as a devotee in Shiva Lok, in Mahesh Dham, and then as the as the creator of the world. From the Rasic point of view, of course, then we place him, Shiva in Goloka, next, next to at the gate of the Rasa dance, it's Gopishwar. So I think that's how to look at those verses. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. That helped a lot.
It's also, along those lines, it's also said that it's an offense to the holy name to consider Vishnu and Shiva to be different. It's one of the ways of interpreting I think the second offense, why we should distinguish between Krishna and the gods. Shiva's in another category.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think Brahma, Haridas got it right there. He didn't commit that offense. Namacharya, Vijay. What else?
So this next question is Jeremy, and he asked me to ask it. Can one be a devotee of Krishna and obtain him without having taken vows?
Is Sadashiva the form of Shiva with Parvati who can give liberation, as stated in Brihad Bhagavatamrita? Well, I think that Sadashiva does have his consort there in Maheshdam. So in that sense, yes. What else?
So did you hear that question from Jeremy? Can one be a devotee? Can you hear me, Kumar?
Now I can.
You can. Okay. Can one be a devotee of, no, you can't. Bad connection, huh? It's not good.
I can't make out what you're saying.
Okay.
Try again.
Okay. Can one be a devotee of Krishna and obtain him without having taken vows? Can't hear it.
You can read it in the chat.
No, I'd have to copy it. I can do that. Let me copy and paste.
Well, I heard one be a devotee of Krishna.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Yes, your connection is good. What's the question? Without accepting vows? Jeremy. Well, one aspect of Sharanagati, which is the outer expression of Shraddha or faith, and the central focus in terms of Bhakti's culture in the stages of sadhana Bhakti, Sharanagati, to develop this kind of surrender, resigning oneself to Krishna. Two aspects of that Sharanagati are pratikul and anukul. Anukulasya sankalpa, partikulasya varjana. And we mentioned them earlier with regard to transcending the duality of material existence by accepting what's favorable for Krishna's service, rejecting what's unfavorable. So the spirit, Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains, behind this aspect of Sharanagati, pratikul, anukul, accepting, rejecting the unfavorable, accepting the favorable, is a commitment, a vrata, a vow, a promise. That's the spirit behind it. So you cannot, how can you be a Sharanagata without that kind of a commitment? So that's not probably answering exactly to what you're asking. You're probably thinking about certain vows maybe that some devotees take that maybe perhaps are difficult for you or for other people that you know, and you're wondering if they can become Krishna conscious without accepting them or something, but it's related. It's connected. It's relative, of course, to who our guru is. Our guru may ask us to have a certain measure of commitment. Another guru may have other items that he or she is concerned with and only willing to accept a disciple if they are willing to accept those type of commitments. So that depends who your guru is, but in a broader sense, as I'm answering, no would be the answer. There has to be that kind of commitment to and resolve, which is central to accepting a vow. I will not do this. This is not favorable to bhakti. I will not, let's say, Prabhupada had a commandment like not to take intoxication. I will not take intoxication. I'm going to make a commitment to this. This did not help me about. So that's an example. Different gurus may have different things, as I say, but I think it's really not possible to avoid, in principle, making a commitment. And then within the context of bhakti, there are all types of vows that one may take to try to, with an effort to increase their bhakti, their absorption, their practice during different days of the year and times of the year and so forth. Different vratas or vows are suggested. Now, it doesn't mean to say that that by making a vow and being unable to live up to it, that all is lost. That's not necessarily the case either. Indeed, the stage of anishta bhajana kriya, where one's practice is not perfect and it's up and down, is a stage that comes after one is actually practicing, which involves accepting initiation and whatever kind of commitments that go with that. But Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur in his Madhurya Kadambini characterizes it as a stage where vows are made and they can't be kept. Often. I'm going to chant a lakh a day now for a month and can't do it. So it's not that all's lost, but we should try our best and make a commitment. Hope that helps.
Pedro, unmute yourself, ask your question. Pedro, are you there?
Pedro, ¿dónde está? Okay. Yes. Yes. Of course, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavatam are two different genres of sacred texts, and they deal with religious life, spiritual ideals, and so forth differently. So the focus in Mahabharata is largely the moral life, moral and ethical life. At the same time, what really gives the Mahabharata life, because the moral adherence and the moral life, the moral rule, if you will, for humans, I've compared to like living in a cage. You've come from animality to humanity, and we've got to take that animality out of you and cage you so that you say, thank you, please, you first, excuse me, and so on and so forth. And in human life, the fact that you have some will as a jiva is coming to the fore a little bit more. So you can do things voluntarily rather than just being under the force of nature as a result of your previous karma, so forth, as in the case of lower forms of life, less complex forms of life. So we cage the human with moral life, but the idea is to get out of the cage also. So rules are made to be broken. They have a purpose by which they point remotely they point away from animal life, if you will, and faintly towards transcendence and the freedom to be an adulterer, as Krishna is. That's a way of putting it, of course. See how the transcendence is depicted. Krishna and the gopis are committing adultery. They're beyond the rules. That doesn't mean that we do these things so that we can commit adultery in human society, but it means that the rules have their limitations. So the moral life is the main focus, in one sense, of the Mahabharata. But when you come to the Gita, which is placed in the Mahabharata at the most exciting time, this diplomacy has been going on. The atrocities of Duryodhana have built up, and it's come to the point where there's a breakdown in any hope for diplomacy to resolve the situation. There's going to be a war. Wow. So all this political and intrigue and human emotion and so forth, and everyone's on the edge of their seat, and here comes Bhagavad Gita, which now takes it to another level, right? Immediately, right in the second chapter, Krishna begins with it. Take it to another level. Human life is about transcending even the limits of the civilized, cultured, religious, moral life. And by contrast, the latter, which is focused on in the Gita, developed more fully is the subject of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's about rasa. Bhagavad Gita goes in that direction, and I like to say the theological sequel to the Gita is the Bhagavatam. So the life of Krishna. And so there you're going to get a different focus. So it's the characters that are going to be talked about in the different texts are going to be talked about from different angles. How is Krishna talked about in the Mahabharata? Not like he's talked about in the Bhagavatam. To some extent, you could get the idea he's a divine figure. He's God. But in the Bhagavatam, he's being tied up by Mother Yasoda. So it's on a whole different level. So it's an example. Krishna is spoken about differently in the Mahabharata than he is in the Bhagavatam. So Bhishma will as well, relative to the angle of vision that the text is taking and how that text is trying to introduce to society or speak to society, human society, about transcendence. And there are different levels of speaking about that to different people, in different circumstances, and different times. So the Mahabharata is a particular way of speaking about it, and the Bhagavatam is quite different in its focus. We, of course, as Gaudiyas, also look at the Bhagavatam as the hub around which the whole wheel and orbit of all other scriptural texts circle. So if we want to understand the Mahabharata, if we want to understand this Upanishad or that Purana and the different statements there, we look at them in relation to the Bhagavatam. If they contradict the Bhagavatam in some way, which tells us that there's relativity in the scripture, then we look at it as teaching according to that time and circumstance for that purpose and so forth, but not as an absolute mandate, for example. Krishna may be talked about differently in different scriptures. Shiva may be talked about differently in different scriptures. But how does he talked about in the Bhagavatam? We look at those other statements in relation to that. And then we determine their value on a scale, and to the extent we determine the extent to which they apply to us. Not all statements apply to us necessarily. We're on a particular path. We're on the Paramahamsa Marg of the Bhagavatam. So mandates in other Puranas, that sometimes some devotees pull up some obscure Purana, some statement there and think it's like central and so forth, may have nothing to do with us whatsoever. Or in Dharma Shastra from the Manusmriti or something like that, for example. It's good to have a broader idea of how these different texts are speaking about the same thing, but to different persons and on different levels, and emphasizing and so forth. And this is one of the beautiful contributions of our Sampradaya through the pen of Jiva Goswami and his Sandarbhas. He's located the Bhagavatam as the central hub, again, around which all the other texts orbit and in relation to which they're understood in context. So the devotion of Bhishma Dev is, yes, it's brought out much more in the Bhagavatam. We find that Bhishma Dev wanted to see Krishna break his promise. If he was willing, he made a promise not to bear any weapon during the battle. And so Bhishma Dev wanted to put Arjuna in such a position, and unless Krishna raised a weapon, Arjuna would not be spared. Bhishma Dev wanted to see whether Krishna loved Arjuna more and was more committed in his love to Arjuna and his protection than he was to any other commitment he may have made. For example, not to raise a weapon. So when Arjuna was on the verge of being defeated, slayed, killed by Bhishma Dev, well, Krishna took the wheel of the chariot and turned it into a chakra. It came after Bhishma Dev, and that was it. Bhishma was satisfied. I knew you were Bhakta Vatsal. I knew that you can't be trusted except by your devotees. They can trust you. Nobody else necessarily. You might, and this, he was satisfied with this. And then of course he's defeated by Krishna, and on the bed of arrows he offers beautiful prayers and so forth. So the fullness of who Bhishma is certainly there in the Bhagavatam, more than in his heart is there in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's not found showcased to the same degree in Mahabharata. Bhishma Dev, Mahajan ki jai.
Hare Krishna. So it's We have 1 minute left. Would you like to take a quick question
Yeah, how many more do we have?
or? Well, we have Vijay has a question, and then Chidahari had a question if there was time.
Let's hear Judahari's question. I mean, I'll try to answer. Yes.
This is not a, it's more of a dharmic question, I guess you could say. I was reading through one of your old Clarion Call articles on consciousness and sound, and in it, the point was made that the intent that the sound is created with is more important than the music, right, itself. And that got me thinking about this as a discussion now in society of whether or not one can separate art from artist. And I was wondering what your thoughts would be on that.
Whether you can separate art from artists?
Yes, yeah, whether you can separate the art from the artist. In other words, the argument is that a lot of the aesthetic value of art is one thing, whereas a lot of these artists that have made these great works have been shown to be really horrible people in their lives. Their character is bad. But their art, if we are to, based on that, not look at their art, then we're missing out on a lot of aesthetic value. So, but the point that was being made in the article of the Clarion Call was that musicians, for example, have a duty to society to put out content there, that they do have a responsibility in what they create to society.
Well, I'm not familiar entirely with the current argument that you bring up for the discussion, but I kind of understand it in terms of how you presented it. But I don't know. I would think that that an artist could have been a horrible person by today's standards, or less than an ideal person by today's standards, and maybe even by the standards at the time in which he or she lived, but still have something good about them and extraordinary that is represented in their art. People are complex and multidimensional, so even the worst person, even the greatest mafia guy has love for his daughter or something, and might say something very beautiful, heartfelt, that would be poem that would be worth reciting and showcasing. And of course, then the other point is, it's not really fair entirely to judge people of previous times and cultures by standards of our time and culture. That's very, we're different people, and we're wired different. We're as the material world is always changing, always developing, and so forth. So it's something new about it. So you need sometimes new moral and ethical, positions on issues that wouldn't have been issues in the past going forward. There's a term called presentism, which is judging people of the past by the present. I like to give the example of Abraham Lincoln, who was judged to be a great person because of his fight for abolition to abolish slavery. But he also said that, of course, the slaves could never run for office, obviously, because they're less people, would be the implication, but that's how what they were like at the time in terms of the environment was such that all that they could be was not being facilitated. And so that's that wasn't understood. And so we don't call him a terrible man and take down his statue because he said that. We think he had the fortitude and the insight in his time to liberate the slaves and struggle in the political arena, even in the face of war and so forth, to make that happen. But I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. But I think the intent is I don't know how you can even in law intent is everything. You murder somebody but you don't intend to, it's called manslaughter. If you kill somebody unintentionally, the more there is intent behind a crime, the more culpable one is. So Baba Grahi Janardana said, the feeling, the intention is everything. So those are some thoughts as we kind of run out of time here. So it's now what? Oh, we're a little bit over time. So anyway, okay. If you didn't get your question answered, please come back and tune in next week. Look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you so much. It's very beautiful. And devotees, stay on. I have a couple of announcements. Umaj,
Hare
thank you
Krishna.
so much. Okay, announcements. We're having a series of classes, Top Vivek, for at least the next month, maybe 2 months. And it'll be every day at 11:30. There'll be a class. Mondays, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. Mondays, Padmanabha Swami is continuing his Vaishnava etiquette classes. Tuesday, Ashram Swami is giving a series of classes on Sharanagati, the path of surrender. Wednesdays, 11:30, Dulal Chandra will be giving series on Krishna Sandarbha. Thursdays, Padmanabha Swami will be giving another class on Vaishnava etiquette. Fridays, 11:30, Brigupad will be doing the Mana Shiksha, instructions to the mind. And Saturdays, Gaura Sundar will be giving an overview of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, and then Sundays will be our questions and answers with Guru Maharaj. And we also have 2 dates to put in your calendar. We have Gaur Purnim, March 28th, and we have March 27th, which is Guru Maharaj's Vyas Puja Day. So he'll be giving class on both of those days at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. So it'll be a very enlivening 2 days, and we hope everybody will be able to join. And I think that's it for now. And we'll see everybody tomorrow, maybe. We'll see some of you tomorrow for Vaishnava
Archana?
etiquette class.
Can you hear me?
Jai. And thank you to the devotees that had sent me some suggestions for things to help kind of create more community in the Sangha. And I'm going to be discussing those with Padmanabha Swami when he comes here in another week and a half. So have some ideas and new things maybe for everyone. So thank you all so much. And,
Thank you. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Can you hear me, Archana?
Hare Krishna. Hare
Thank you.
Krishna.
Oh, and also to the devotees too that have sent some donations to continue the this Zoom call, because yeah, it's an expensive feature having the translation feature. So if anybody else is inclined to want to help out with the cost of the Zoom account, they can contact me at archanacity.com. It's ARCHANASIDDHI. And also Aradhana put something up on Sri Chaitanya Sangha as well. And we have gotten a couple donations. We thank those devotees very, very much for their help. Okay, so we'll see everybody soon. Hare
May I
Krishna.
suggest something, if I can suggest something, because there on the website, Swami Tripurari, you can like help us, there is donation. And then for Madhuvan, for this, that, usually I'm always giving for Madhuvan. This is option, I go to PayPal and I give some donation every month. So it would be good that there in this menu, also is there help Zoom conference. And then you go very slightly, easily make it. So maybe this is a good idea.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'll have to talk to Bhakti Ross. I think she's the administrator for that. Okay, well, that's a great idea. Yeah, then that way we could just have a steady flow and wouldn't have to keep be asking people to donate. That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, all of you, and have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Jai Haribol.